Sup all, born in Asphodel Meadow here, and this is going to be another response to the user by the name of the Amazinglibertarian. Or sorry, just Amazinglibertarian, my bad, I always make that mistake. As opposed to my usual videos, I don't think I'm going to edit this one, because all I have is the audio. I'm just going to do it in one take, so if it fucks up, screw it. Good couple of videos, man, I enjoyed them, and your points are much better in this video, actually, much more refined. I acknowledge your proofs of Jesus' resurrection, and I won't really contest most of them. However, your arguments of the apostles not stealing the body of Jesus because why else would they go to their deaths for Christianity if they weren't sure it was correct? I do intend to contest that one. I say to you again, I have no proof they died for their cause. You ask for possible reasons why one would die for a belief that they knew to be false. Well, what if they were killed without being given the chance to explain to everyone that it was a lie? Like, let's just say one day they were preaching and some soldiers came up to them and killed them where they stood. And they were written up as martyrs in the Bible because they did, in fact, die for their cause. As they would be written up in the Bible. I mean, come on. Anyone who dies for Christianity, in that day and age, they're going to be called a martyr. But, again, I have no proof that they did die. And if they did die, I have no proof that they had a choice in the matter. That, like, it never says they went to their deaths. I have no proof they went to their deaths. It could have just been could have just happened. I could also assert once again that they were delusional. Maybe they thought Jesus was God, but were wrong. Then again, of course, you might say, if they thought Jesus was God, why did they need to fake his resurrection? Well, I'm going to assume you're familiar with guys like Kent Hovind and Ray Comfort. They are men who deliberately use fallacies, half-truths, and emotional appeals, and sometimes even outright lies to convince people to become Christian. But they themselves claim to be convinced by Christianity. So one could ask, why do they see the need to spread lies and fallacies for the sake of Christianity when they don't believe it to be true? Or say, when they believe Christianity to be true. Like, if it's true, why lie about it? If it's true, why would they make stuff up about it? Why wouldn't they just tell the truth? The reason is for the same reason the apostles may have. They are convinced, though not necessarily correct, I may add, but that isn't really enough to convince others, is it? So they do these elaborate things like fake resurrections and huge apparently philosophical arguments that are just fallacies, to fake resurrection, to convince masses of people of what they already know. Even if the tools they use are lies, Then again, any one of these is actually possible, and unless you can prove without a doubt that everything about the resurrection of Jesus is true, without using phrases like, well, why wouldn't it be true, then the only way to judge whether or not it happened would be based on the odds. Which do you consider more likely? That a few men got together and a few men got together and decided to start a religion that would record them as heroes for millennia, or that Jesus was just an elaborate illusionist and people interpreted him as him being God, or the odds that there's this being that's all-knowing and all-powerful and loving and came to earth as his son, but also himself to live as a human, but better because he never sinned, and then have himself tortured and killed intentionally, only to have himself brought back into heaven to be with himself. And this somehow cured humanity of sin. I mean, obviously, you can tell by my tone of voice that I don't really believe the last one, because, the last one has no variables we can really go by, aside from our own personal judgment. And if you choose to believe the last one, that's fine by me, really. But you understand now that, I have chosen to believe differently, and verifiably, I'm more or less right than you. No less right than you, is what I mean. Also, when going over my definition of delusion, you pointed out that a lot of what I consider to be illogical about religion, Noah's Ark and all that, doesn't really apply to you, and that your beliefs are not fixed, and you don't believe in God absolutely. If I implied that, I apologize. It wasn't my intention. My intention was to point out how easy it is for someone to meet the qualifications of being delusional. So, if you and others like you aside, Christians, the ones who believe in Noah's Ark and stuff like that, the ones whose beliefs never change, could all be delusional. The only thing stopping them from being so is proof that God can't exist, and no such proof can be found. So, Jesus' apostles could have all been delusional without much difficulty. The only thing that would stop them would be if Jesus was actually God. And if so, I'm incorrect, Like, if he is actually God, I'm wrong. So, one thing, though, you pointed out that you cannot perceive my brain, but you don't disbelieve that I have a brain because you can't perceive it, Thus, one should not necessarily disbelieve that God exists because one can't perceive him. I'm actually really glad you brought this up. You see, there's a crucial flaw in this analogy. You could crack open my head and see for yourself that I have a brain. Or, if you really wanted to. Or you could use an MRI to avoid my death. I suppose that would work just as well. The one thing about religion that I find more suspicious and more indicative than possible falsehood than anything else is that God, all of his parts and all of his workings are immeasurable by human instruments. Like, there's nothing about God that's falsifiable. Like, for example, if there was a religion that said God lived on the top of Mount Everest, and he worked everything from there, that was his throne, it was on the top of Mount Everest, it would have stood for a long time because no one can climb Everest, no one could have climbed Everest at the time. But eventually someone did, and they didn't notice any gods living up there, so that religion would have been falsified. But the Christian God can not only hide in every crack that we can't venture into in the universe, if he chose to, even if we explored every nook and cranny of the universe, we could still, say that God is not of the universe, he's outside it, and then what can really be done to falsify him? I mean, you could look at you could look yourself at my brain to see proof that is there. But no matter what, I can never look for myself at your God, and that's what I find suspicious. Finally, I noticed you said two things in your video that I heard as being mutually contradictory. You say that you believe that God's existence is a logical answer based on facts, like the resurrection of Jesus. We've heard our points on the matter, so, for argument's sake, I'll say that Jesus was resurrected, okay? It would be a challenge for me to explain how man can rise from the dead after days of being a corpse in a tomb without somehow factoring God into the equation. So, assuming that Jesus was divinely resurrected, it makes sense that God would exist. Then I pointed out that God's existence doesn't account for suffering and evil existing, because God could have prevented it. And you say that, in your own words, what makes sense to me isn't a point either way. My point makes sense, but you discount it because no one fully understands anything. But earlier, you asserted that God exists and gave evidence that made sense to you. I can easily use the same argument reversed, like the fact that Jesus died and was resurrected by God makes sense to me, but that isn't a point either way. Either argument, like every argument, is in some way or other a point that makes sense to the person who says it. So if you discount those types of arguments, we're not really left with much, are we? So your point makes sense, and so does mine. Well, but your point hinges on an event that happened nearly 2 millennia ago, and although we disagree on the likelihoods of what it is, I'm sure we can both agree that it is subject to some doubt on both our parts. My point is a modern-day fact that is, for our intents, undeniable. So there you go. I look around and I see nothing that indicates that there could be a God, except some age-old anecdotes. And I know you don't look at them like that. I know you look at them like I know you think they're more valid than that. But that's how I see them. And I see things like pain and suffering, and natural disasters and disease, and a lot of stuff that would be considered evil from the religious perspective. And if God exists, he's the cause of it all, and he's doing nothing to stop it. So I don't think he exists. And if he does, then I really don't want to believe in him anyway. I mean, come on. But anyway, thanks again. I look forward to more discussion with you. I am born in Asphodel Meadow, and I will see you guys later. Peace. P.S. I know my name can be a bit irritating to pronounce, so if it sits with you, you can just call me Michael. Talk to you soon, man.